Hi, everyone. My name is Todd Caldwell. I am a Director of Audit Services with the State Board of Accounts. I work with cities, towns, libraries, and what we call special districts, which are smaller units of government like fire districts, regional water and sewer districts, soil and water conservancy districts, etc. I also work with Susan Gordon in these areas. If you contact our office, your call or your email will go to either Susan or myself. I'm in the office Monday through Thursday, and Susan is in Tuesday through Friday. So one of us is generally available to see your email or take your phone call. We have directors in our office who specialize in other areas that we audit, such as schools, counties, townships. If Susan and I happen to be out and you call, your call might be directed to one of our other directors, or you can leave a message and one of us will call you back just as soon as we can. To give you a little background on myself, I was born and raised in Anderson in Madison County. I graduated from Anderson Highland High School and later from Ball State University with a degree in accounting. I currently live in Pendleton with my wife, my 17-year-old daughter, and my 14-year-old son. So yes, prayers are appreciated as I have two teenagers in the house. I've been working with the Board of Accounts since August of 1989. Worked mostly in central Indiana in the counties of Madison, Hancock, Marion, and Hendricks. The first several years, I worked on cities, towns, and schools. Occasionally, I'd get a library or a township trustee worked in, but normally it was cities and towns and schools. About 14 years ago, I audited my first county, and I did that for 4 or 5 years in a row. And then I was the lead auditor on the PERF audit, which later merged with the Teachers Retirement Fund to become what we know now as MPERS. In early 2014, I started working in our Indianapolis office at a new area within our agency that was created by the state examiner. It was called data analysis. This area analyzed data from all units and used it to determine which ones were more risky based on various criteria. And looking at that, it helps us assess which audits are more at risk and therefore the ones we have to do first. Susan and I both became directors in the fall of 2014 when Charlie Pride and Todd Austin both retired. Here's our current contact information, our names, our website, our email addresses, and phone numbers. And just take a couple of seconds to give you a brief overview of the State Board of Accounts and what we do. We're the state agency that audits the records of governmental units. We have auditors, we call them field examiners, located all across the state. By statute, the frequency by which we audit governmental units is determined by risk. And as I mentioned a second ago, we audit those units that we determine to be the most at risk. We do those first. The statute that governs this is Indiana Code 5-11-1-25. The states our audits shall not be less than once every 4 years. So if you're a unit and you have things in order, you got good controls, you haven't had a lot of problems in the past, you're probably low risk, and we probably will only visit you one time within that 4-year period. If you're a unit that constantly has problems or a lot of comments from prior reports or other issues going on, your risk is increasing and we'll probably come see you more frequently until that risk gets reduced. The board of the Board of Accounts is made up of 3 persons, the state examiner and 2 deputies. Appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Legislative Council, Paul Joyce is the current state examiner. Michael Bazimski and Tammy White are the 2 deputies. We have a division within our agency called Engagement Strategies. They're responsible for planning and scheduling the audits that we do and which of our personnel are going to do those audits based on certain priorities that are going on. Each audit has a lead auditor who oversees the day-to-day audit activity for that unit. There's also an audit manager assigned. The audit manager reviews the work of the lead auditor and the field team. There's also an audit coordinator who reviews the work of the audit manager and directs the underlying audit staff during the engagement if questions come up. I wanted to take a few minutes and go over our website with you, what it looks like, where you can find information. You can see the address there on the screen. This is what the home page looks like. Specific information on the various units that we audit can be found over on the left-hand side under political subdivisions. I've enlarged that left side on this slide a little bit so you can see it. You're going to be looking for this, political subdivisions, and then you click on the plus sign next to that word. And when you do that, this is what you'll see. This is a list of all the political subdivisions that we audit. You'll want to go either to the cities or the towns or the special districts that I mentioned that we have earlier. If you happen to be a volunteer fire department, you can check here under non-governmental entities receiving governmental assistance. That's where you would be classified, because as an incorporated volunteer fire department, you're non-governmental and you're receiving governmental assistance in the form of fire protection contracts, that kind of thing. All of those pages, when you click on those, are basically the same, even though there are slight differences in the statutes that apply to each one. For illustration purposes, I've only included the cities on this slide. What you'll probably find more useful as you scroll through that page will be the Uniform Compliance Guidelines. These are publications that contain the guidelines and the statutes for city and town accounting. You click next to each of those units there. There's a drop down or an upside down triangle that will give you a drop down when you click on it. You'll probably be most interested in the manuals and the bulletins. And when you click on those gray triangles, you'll see pages that look like this. So if you click on the manuals, you'll get a listing here of the manuals and the chapters within those manuals that we publish. On the web page, if you were to scroll down, there are a couple of more manuals that I can't see, that I couldn't get in the screen print, just for illustration purposes. But you can click on each of those are links. When you get down to the Uniform Compliance Guideline Manual for Cities, you can see there's a table of contents, and then what's shown on the screen is 7 chapters. You can click on each of those individual chapters, or there is a place where you can download pardon me, the entire manual if you wanted to. If you wanted to look at one of our quarterly bulletins, when you're at this place on our webpage, you'll click on the triangle next to bulletins, and this is what you'll see. These are the cities and towns bulletins, and we issue these each quarter. They're a method of communication between times when the manual is revised or updated. We can put this information out, like I said, quarterly, and then when we end up doing a manual revision, maybe once or twice every couple of years, we can take information from these bulletins and make sure they're included in the manual. You can see we keep these for a period of 10 years, and there is an index, a topical index that you can see that will give you the month and year to look for. So at that first sentence up at the top on the far hand right, there's a link that says clicking here, and that'll give you that index and whatever topic it may say to look at March of 2017, page 4. You can come back to this page and click on the link for March of 2017 and find the article that you're looking for. We also have, for special districts, a manual. And if you click on it, the manual lists the different chapters within a special districts manual. It basically has a chapter for each type of what we call a special district. You'll want to pay particular attention to chapter 1. That applies to all special districts. Chapter 5 is for fire protection districts. And again, chapter 11 as a miscellaneous guidelines, it also applies to all special districts. So those are the 3 you might want to look at if you are a fire protection or other type of special district. Something else that you might find useful is going back to the home page and looking on this button here, the search reports. When you click on it, you will see the audit reports that state examiner files. Those are our audit reports after we've done an audit, and those are the findings within those. When you click on that button, you're going to see this, where you can search by the various criteria to find your city or town audit or any other audits that we have. So you can search by the unit name, the audit years, the county, or the unit type. Normally, if you're looking for, I live in the town of Pendleton. If I was looking for anything related to Pendleton, I could just type Pendleton in the search box on the left, and it'll pull up anything with the word Pendleton in the title. If I was only looking for the town of Pendleton and not the school corporation or the library or anything, I could type Pendleton, and then I could go over to the unit type and just select town, and it would just give me those reports. You'll also see when you find those reports that down on the left-hand side, once you get into each report, there's a blue number, a report number. If it's blue, that's a link. You click on it, it'll take you to that audit report. If you happen to find an older one where the report number is not blue, that report predates Adobe, so there's not a PDF on file for it online. We do have copies of it. If you, for some reason, need to see that report, you can request it from us. We will go to the microfiche and find it and pull it out and tell you how many pages are in that report, and then let you know what the cost is going to be, because there is a production cost per page. If it's a very lengthy report, maybe you already decide you don't want it based on the price. But once we communicate that with you, you can send us the payment, and then we will print off copies of the report and mail it to you. Next, I want to cover internal controls. I'm not going to go real in depth with this like we do with some other city and town officials, but I want to let you know what internal controls are and why they're important. Each department should have established internal controls. So if you're starting out someday and you're in charge of a department, you become chief, maybe you want to be aware of what controls are within the department as it relates to the financial activity. There are some statutory requirements that govern internal controls. Internal control standards. Each governing body, like a town council or the trustees of the fire district, have to adopt the minimum standards that are found in the Indiana Code. So you want to check with your governing body and see if they've done that. Most probably already have, as that statutory requirement to adopt those minimum standards went into effect a few years ago. We do occasionally find units that haven't done that yet. So check and see if your governing body has adopted the minimum standards of internal controls. Also, the statute requires training on those standards for those personnel who basically collect or have access to money. And those controls that we're talking about should be documented in writing as policies and procedures. So pictured on the screen is our manual on internal controls that you can find on our website. And the statute that governs all of internal controls and these minimum standards and the training that I've been talking about is in Indiana Code 5-11-1-27. So why are internal controls important? Well, they're important so that everyone within an organization is aware of the procedures and processes to properly account for any money that your department might collect. An internal control is identifying an objective, designing controls in order to achieve that goal, putting those controls in place, and then hopefully you're achieving your goal. For example, let's say a fee is collected at your department. How is that cash or that check going to be handled? What is the first objective? It's going to be to record that collection. So who's going to do that? Person A going to do that? Is person B going to do that? And then what? Once you've recorded it, how does that money get into the bank? Does someone from your department deposit it? Maybe you take it to the clerk treasurer's office or the fiscal officer and have them deposit it. The biggest thing to know is to identify what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and document that procedure in writing, and then communicate it with those that need to know so that everyone is aware of what the plan is and what's expected. When you look at that statute I mentioned a minute ago, 511-127, in our internal control manual, you're going to see mention of the 5 components of internal control. They are monitoring, risk assessment, control environment, information and communication, and monitoring. The picture on the screen represents how these components are interrelated and connected. So all 5 are necessary for true internal control. So if one component is lacking in that cube, for example, risk assessment, second from the bottom, if that's lacking, you would pull that out. It's not going to be strong enough to hold that whole cube up. It's going to collapse. So you can see how the 5 components interrelate to your department's operations, your financial reporting, and your compliance with various laws and regulations. Now I'm going to go through each component fairly quickly because I don't need to dig into the weeds very much, but let's start with the control environment. This is basically how those in charge view a department. In a city or town, it's going to be probably a council or a board of works or a board of public safety. A fire district, it's going to be the board of trustees. And in the accounting world, there's a phrase, it's called tone at the top, that the control environment is set by those in governance, those at the top, and that those controls or those ethical values, they reflect downward in a unit, they trickle down. So if those in charge set good control environments, then those underneath, the theory is, will follow. So first, for a control environment, we recommend there be an organizational chart if there isn't already. Most places also have an employee handbook. We would recommend those as part of the control environment. That helps establish what's expected for all employees and officials. And this is the part, or this is the area where we would start to expect to see those control procedures written down and be approved by the powers that be. And in talking about writing these down, if you don't already have written controls, we're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. A lot of places already have controls in place. They may not have them documented. So once you start writing down who does what as far as the financial activity is concerned, it's easier to see that, oh, we have one person that does like 4 things, and maybe we should separate some of those duties from that person. Or we haven't addressed this area that seems to be lacking. It's not sometimes until you get it down on paper do you realize maybe there's something to look at. So this is the part, or this is the area where you would start to do that. The second component is risk assessment, and that's assessing the risk that financial information might not be correctly handled or reported. So remember the handling of cash or that collection I mentioned a little bit before, there are risks associated with that. One being that someone doesn't write a receipt and instead steals the money. How do you handle that potential risk is part of the risk assessment component. So do you accept the risk that someone might steal money, or do you implement a control to reduce that risk? Do you avoid the risk altogether and simply not address it? You turn away, you close your eyes to it, you pretend it's not there. Do you reduce the risk? Writing a receipt for that collection reduces the risk of stealing because now it's documented that someone actually did turn money into you on a certain date and a certain amount. Another way of assessing the risk is, do you transfer that to another department? Remember I mentioned maybe your control is, instead of collecting money in your department, or after you've collected it, I should say, do you deposit it, or does the clerk treasurer or the fiscal officer deposit it and you take it to them? You've somewhat transferred the risk of part of that transaction in that example because someone else is going to be taking that money to the bank. So from a financial standpoint, you need to take a look at and identify the risks and determine how you're going to handle them when you're designing your internal controls. Control activities are those designed to detect and prevent certain items. A segregation of duties separates the like-kind activities between as many people as possible. So to go back to the receipt example, a control activity would be to have person A write a receipt for the money collected and person B to review it after the fact. Or person A might prepare a report at the end of the month showing all receipts collected and person B review it and approve it. This would help detect if inaccuracies are happening or help prevent person A maybe from taking the money if they know person B is going to be reviewing it later. So segregating duties, you don't want person A doing both, writing the receipts and approving the monthly receipt report I just mentioned. You don't want person A issuing receipts and making the bank deposit and taking that money to the bank and then recording it in a ledger. That just gives that person a whole lot of opportunity to make mistakes or to do something fraudulent and be able to hide it or not have anyone else look at it. So you want to get as many eyes involved in the process as you can and separating some of those duties. Maybe person A collects the money and writes a receipt, but person B reviews that receipt report later, maybe once a month or once a week. And maybe they're also the one that takes the money to the bank. It's just something where you don't have one person doing everything. Information and communication is basically informing staff of the policies and procedures being put in place. It's letting them know of what is available from the State Board of Accounts and where to find it. It also involves external communication. First to the State Board of Accounts. Like if there's a variance or loss over the stated materiality threshold, you're supposed to report that to us. I'm going to go a little more in depth in that in a minute. Second, you have to report to the Board of Accounts if there is a misappropriation of funds or basically a theft by a public employee or official. You have to report both of those items to the State Board of Accounts, so that's part of your communication control. Also, communication to patrons and citizens in your area through board minutes, publications, websites, making the public aware of where they can find information on your unit falls within that component. And monitoring activities are just what they sound like. Activities to monitor that the controls designed and implemented are happening like intended. They are periodic checks that the controls are being followed. So again, to go back to the receipt example, there should be controls in place to periodically check and see that receipts are in fact being written or issued. It's a little different than reviewing that monthly or weekly report that I gave in the early example, because that was a control activity. In monitoring in this area, monitoring should occur to ensure that the control procedures are being followed and not being circumvented. I mentioned a few slides back about materiality. This is a directive issued by the state examiner in 2005 on your screen. A full copy might be in your materials, or if not, there's a link on the bottom of the screen where you can go read the entire document. It's a couple pages long, and there's only one page illustrated. It basically says that each governmental unit, so a city, a town, a fire district, etc., should establish a materiality threshold over which losses or variances should be reported to the Board of Accounts for our consideration. So anything over the level a governing body establishes gets reported. So let's say you're a fire district and your Board of Trustees has set that level at $500. And then the bookkeeper for the district is doing the bank reconciliation for the month of July, and the variance is $501, and the bookkeeper can't easily identify what that difference is. They've done some looking. It's not very apparent. It's not jumping right out at them. And so they've spent some time trying to find it, but they can't because it's over the $500 level, even though it's only over $1. They would have to report that variance to the State Board of Accounts. They would continue to research and try to identify the variance, but the chances are, because it's been reported to us, at some point we're going to get involved and try to find out what's happening with the internal controls that's allowing this variance to occur and not get detected. If that difference was, say, $499, which is below the level, the threshold, that you would not have to report it to us. You would still continue to look for it and try to identify it and hopefully have it identified by the time the audit comes around. but you would not be required to report it to the State Board of Accounts. The reporting is required by Indiana Code 5-11-1-27J, which requires the reporting of material variances. And you'll see in that statute it mentions theft, but it's not talking about thefts known to occur by public officials or employees. Theft in this statute is meaning like you come to work one day and the window's busted out and some of your equipment's been stolen. It's referring to these types of thefts where you can't identify it as being an employee or an official, or in other words, theft from the outside. I'll discuss theft by a public official here in a second. So if you've got a material variance, how do you report it to us? For example, the July bank reconciliation is $501 off and your threshold is $500. So you've got to report it to us. You can go to the State Board of Accounts website, where I showed you on the city's page or the town's page or the special districts page, and you scroll way down to the bottom, you'll see a section that looks like this. It says responsibilities under 511-127. So you can report it online by entering the information, your name, your email address, blah, blah, blah. You get down to the bottom, there's a box for situation. I kind of cut it off for the screen print, so there's a little more room available for you to type in on the website exactly what the problem is. And then you hit submit and you have reported it to us. You can also send us an email to report the variance, or if you want to actually send a written letter, you're more than welcome to do that too. You just have to report it to us in writing. If you call us to tell us that, we're probably going to ask you to document it in writing and either email it or send it by post office mail to us. Now, what about if you have a loss due to misappropriation or a loss due to the acts of an employee or an official? If you believe or have reason to believe that someone within your organization is stealing or misappropriating funds, there is no threshold for this variance or this loss. You're required to report any suspected misappropriation in writing to the State Board of Accounts as well as the county prosecutor. So keep that in mind. If you see someone comes in to pay a fee and the person at the desk puts that money in their pocket, even if it's a couple of bucks, because there's no threshold, any variance has to be reported. You're supposed to report that to the Board of Accounts so we can determine a course of action and see that that activity is stopped. Well, that's all on internal controls for now. I'm going to stop and we're going to take a break just due to the format of recording these webinars. I don't want them to be too lengthy, so they're probably going to be in 3 or 4 parts. This is the end of part 1. And what I'll allow you to do is to ask questions among yourselves before you start the next part, or go get another cup of coffee because I've totally bored you out of your mind and you need a little more caffeine. That's understandable. So I'll go ahead and stop here, and then when you're ready, you can start part 2 and we'll go from there. Thanks.